So I'm Tim Jackson, and my day job is I'm principal horn of the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra. But in addition to that, I have lots of other interests in music. For instance, I also teach horn at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester. I do other private teaching, but my real main interest outside the orchestra is in writing music, composing and arranging and transcribing. Three very different skills. Composing, you would probably say, is creating music from scratch by yourself. Arranging is taking music which has been written already by somebody else and turning it into a new piece using your own ideas. And transcribing is a skill that sort of comes between the two of those, which is taking an original piece of music and reworking it so it can be played on another instrument than the one that the composer originally intended it to be for, but kind of remaining as faithful as possible to the original. And I really love having a finger in lots of different pies, as it were, to really enjoy lots of different aspects of music as part of one career. So my first experience of writing music was actually for the horn section of my youth orchestra. There was no real conscious thought process going on behind it, I have to say, but I loved the sound and I loved being able to write music which other people enjoyed playing. And that's really been the biggest thing for me throughout all the writing that I've done, is because I'm a performer as well as a composer, I want to be able to approach things from a performer's point of view and to be able to write music which people are going to really find useful and which they're going to want to play repeatedly. And I've been very fortunate over the years that I've been writing to have some fantastic friends and fantastic colleagues to write pieces for. But there was never really a moment when I thought, I'm going to be a composer. And equally, I don't think there's ever been a moment when I thought, I am now a composer. It's just been a very straightforward, long transition from writing a bit of music to now having a really conscious process where I try to be writing something all the time. There's always something on the go at home. And I find it actually a very good way of relaxing, actually. It's part of my income, but actually it's such a different way of making music to being part of the orchestra. And I find it a really good way of just kind of switching off and doing something in the evening rather than just sticking the telly on. So for composers to make a living, it's quite a tricky thing, actually, in a way. There's a much more structured career for a performer. If you want to play in an orchestra, you apply for a job, you do the audition, there's a trial process, and then hopefully you get the job. But for a composer, there's no real career path like that. You would almost certainly end up being self-employed, like me. And actually, to be honest, there are very, very few composers, really huge name composers nowadays, who only make their living from composing. Most really big name composers will also earn a living as a conductor and probably a university teacher as well, or possibly even private teaching. But having said that, there are lots of different kind of income streams available to a composer. So for instance, I run my own publishing company and I'm able to make some income from publishing my music and also the music of other people and printing that and having it distributed through various shops. There are also opportunities for commissions, as I was saying earlier about the Associated Board of the Royal School of Music, for instance, or other orchestras or chamber music ensembles who would like a piece writing, who will pay a commission fee for that to be written. There's also opportunities for making income through performing rights, which many people won't be aware of, but when a piece of music that is still in copyright, which means that it's been written basically within the last 75 years, whenever one of those pieces is performed, an organisation called the Performing Rights Society collects a certain amount of money from the ticket sales, and that money is then distributed around the composers. So there are various ways for a composer to make a living, and the most important aspect of that, I would say, from my point of view, is firstly to be very flexible in what you're prepared to write and to be able to write in all kinds of different styles, whether it's backing music for pop songs or jazz band stuff or classical chamber music, but also to be able to be very fast, because very often a lot of my income particularly comes from people who need things doing really accurately at the very last minute, who suddenly realise that they're missing a piece of music for a concert and what are we going to do now, and maybe we can find somebody who can write something for us. So having a reputation for being able to work quickly has also been something which has made a big difference to my career as a composer. So when I start writing a song, specifically a song, I would normally always start by looking through somebody else's lyrics. I'm not very good at writing words myself, and there's no point me trying, so I would always be looking for a poem that's pre-existing, and I spend an awful lot of time reading books and books and books of poetry, making lists of poems that I might like to be able to set to music at a later stage. The first thing that I would do then is normally to sit down at the piano and to just play and improvise and experiment and frankly just mess about a little bit until something arrives that I quite like the sound of, that feels like it's going to be useful to illustrate the music. For me personally, the part of writing a song that I like the most is the harmony, the chord progressions. And very often for me the original idea for a piece will be sparked off by just a group of 2 or 3 chords that will work together, that feel like they're moving the music somewhere, and that I'm going to be able to write a melody that will sit on top of those chords. And I really enjoy that process of finding the chords that are going to work really well for a particular piece. But if I was writing a piece that wasn't a song, the place that I would be starting normally when there are no lyrics would actually be trying to get a little germ of a melodic idea to start the piece from. And very often when I'm doing that, I actually have a system where I take a word and translate the letters into notes by taking A as middle C and just sort of going A, B, C, D, E, F, G and so on, and just getting, it's basically a set of random notes and seeing where they start me off. The transition from a blank page to some sound is the scariest part of writing any piece for any composer, and I suspect even more so for a person who's just starting out their composing life. And for me, just getting that kind of first set of notes, and they maybe won't even make it into the final piece, but just as a kickstart, as something to begin the process, or even using telephone numbers or something like that, just something, a system that will give me a set of notes that I can begin to work with. So different approaches. But I would certainly start with chords if I was writing a song. When I first read Roger McGough's poem, The Sound Collector, I absolutely loved it, which is a really good start. When you're writing a song, it's obviously you want to enjoy the words that you're working with. The atmosphere of the poem was really, really fantastic. It spoke to me in a way that was kind of slightly sinister, slightly dark kind of feeling to the words, but also there's a kind of underlying current of humour. And I wanted to try to write some music that will capture both of those two aspects, slightly sinister but also with humour in it as well. Now in terms of what I did to try to create that kind of slightly sinister but also humorous thing, I started off, as I was saying before, in this particular case, I started off with a set of chords. And in this particular instance, there are only 4 chords in the piece. There's a G minor, followed by E flat minor, followed by C minor, and then a D7 chord. And it just goes round that set of chords. But to try to give the sinister kind of feeling, I wanted to do something that was going to have a rhythm that you aren't quite expecting to happen the way that it would feel natural, that you can automatically tap your feet along to. So what I made sure was that not all of those chords happen on the strong beats of the bar. So there are 4 beats in a bar in the piece that I've chosen, and the first chord starts on the first beat, but the second chord is between the second and third beats. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, and that second chord there just comes somewhere where you don't expect it quite as though it's going to be exactly in that place. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that chord just jumping in the middle there makes things a little bit more unexpected, and it feels like it's just got that slightly sinister feel behind it. What I wanted then to do was to make sure that the feeling of this strange character creeping around the house all the time, that there was constant movement. And so I wanted to make sure there was something going da, 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 absolutely all the time. And I actually started off by trying to just play those chords as chords, repeated, but with a constant rhythm. Which I was quite happy with actually, and I did actually work with that for quite a long time. And eventually it got to the point, possibly because I just played it to myself over and over again so many times, that I was actually getting too familiar with that, and it didn't sound quite sinister enough anymore. So what I decided to do was use it's a very simple technique, but it's one that makes the music sound much more sophisticated in a way that it is. which is to take that first chord, the G minor chord, which has got the notes G, B flat and D in it, and to add to that note the second note of the scale, the A, which clashes against the B flat, and you have that crunch. And to repeat that for all the other chords as well, so that you really hear that, the crunch in each of the chords. And it's that crunch that you hear in the middle of each of those chords. Now again, that was exactly then how I worked with it for the next 10 days or so, until I eventually decided that what that was giving me was too long sitting on each chord. And so the final twist that made it into the piece, as we actually were going to hear it, is to take that crunching chord, but then to resolve the crunch each time, so that you hear that with the tension and then relaxing, tension and relaxing, tension and relaxing each time. And that also then creates this lovely little kind of internal melody within the chords. So I'll play it once with the chords just as chords, and then I'll change it to what I actually have done in the end. And then this is the change. Now, not only that, the challenge of this particular poem from a composer's point of view is that it's about taking sound away, which from the point of view of writing a song is a little bit odd actually, because a song is about putting sound there, not taking it away. So what I decided that I would do is start off at the beginning of the song with the whole orchestra playing, really pretty loudly actually, with all kinds of strange noises happening, and gradually through the course of the piece strip all of those sounds away until you finish off at the very end of the piece with hardly anybody playing at all and really, really quiet, to kind of illustrate those sounds disappearing as you're playing. And so, for instance, at the very beginning of the piece, the very first thing that you'll hear in the orchestral version is a set of kitchen pots and pans being hit with wooden spoons, which you'd be surprised how long it took to actually find 5 pots and pans that make a single note. If you try this at home actually, go to your kitchen cupboard and get a pan out and give it a good old donk. And actually, if it makes just one sound, that's really unusual. Most kitchen pots and pans make a kind of splat that hasn't got a really identifiable pitch. And it took us ages to find 5 pans that made 5 different pitches. It felt like a very easy thing I was asking for, and in the end it turned out not to be. But through the course of the poem, I've also tried to illustrate some of the specific sounds that Roger McGough talks about taking away. So, for instance, the ticking of the clock, that's quite an easy one, with 2 wood blocks, tick-tock, going all the time. And at the point at which that is referred to in the poem, that's the point at which it stops, as though the sound collector has taken that particular sound away. The scraping noise of spreading marmalade on the toast I've illustrated using a fantastic Latin American instrument, which some of you may know from your classroom percussion kits, called a gyro, which is a long kind of rugby ball shaped instrument with grooves cut into it that you play with a scraper, and gives a really fantastic, very satisfying wooden scraping sound. The drumming of the raindrops, for instance, in the 5th verse, it's a very interesting effect on the string instruments, which is called col legno, which is when you turn the bow and you play using the wood of the bow rather than the hair of the bow. It gives a really great clicking sound. It still has a pitch that you can identify, but it gives a really brilliant click. And when you have 40 string players all doing that together, it sounds very much like raindrops drumming on a window pane. And in the same verse, the gurgle of the drain have the 2 lowest woodwind instruments, the bass clarinet and the contrabassoon, which is the lowest sounding instrument in the whole orchestra, playing very low gurgly sounds at the bottom of that. The crying of the baby, the beautiful sound of the cor anglais, which is a very unusual instrument. It's a woodwind instrument, the kind of the older cousin of the oboe, which is a much longer version of the oboe. It has a kind of egg-shaped bell on the end, and it's got a very plaintive kind of sound, really beautiful sound. And I've used that to illustrate the crying of the baby. And the creaking of the stair also, using a football rattle, which the technical term is a ratchet, where you, instead of swinging it around like you would at a football match maybe, you actually hold that section and you twist the handle, and it gives a really very loud kind of sound for the creaking of the stair. So for some of the sounds, I've tried to illustrate them very literally. A lot of the time, it's just the general sound of the orchestra, starting with everyone playing at the beginning and then gradually stripping away as the piece goes. So one of the questions that I'm often asked as a composer is, how do you convey different emotions through a piece of music? And it's a very real question for a composer, and it becomes more important the more you think about it. Sometimes it can be as straightforward as, are we talking about happy or sad? But actually it's often more useful to try to get even more into exactly what kind of happy or sad do we mean. In sad, for instance, do we mean angry? Do we mean lonely? It's sometimes not quite enough to be as blunt as to say happy or sad. And in some cases, there are very obvious, very straightforward things that you can do that will immediately make a piece of music sound happy, or will immediately make it sound sad. But sometimes the changes that we make are very subtle, and also, and this is a really important point, sometimes the changes that we make to pieces have an effect that you're not expecting, and that you like, and that is worth keeping. And that's a really important part of being a composer for me. The key to really successful composing is allowing yourself to experiment and not just to accept either the first thing that you write because you're so grateful that you've got something down on paper that you just leave it there anyway, or that you get disheartened by the first thing that doesn't sound right and you abandon that particular idea. And so what I thought would be a useful thing to do would be to start with my music for the sound collector and to show how you could change that music in ways that I decided not to do or didn't even think about doing while I was writing the piece, and to show how those very small changes can have a really large impact on the emotional effect that the music has. So if I start off by playing the original introduction, the 4-bar introduction to my sound collector music. So as we said already, that's 4 chords with a G minor, E flat minor, C minor, and a D7 chord. And at the moment, those chords change so that there are 3 chords in every 4 beats. So they're actually moving, they're changing chords quite quickly. I can use exactly the same 4 chords, but this time, let's try not changing the chords quite so quickly and actually making each of the chords last for 1 complete bar, so for 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the rhythm is exactly the same, but what we've done is change the harmonic rhythm. That's the technical term for it, the speed at which the chords change. And if I play the original one after the one that I've just played for you now, you'll hear that by contracting that harmonic rhythm, by making the chords move faster, you give more energy and more tension. So this is the drawn out one first. You can feel how it almost feels like the music accelerates at the point at which the chords start happening more closely together, even though the speed, the tempo, is exactly the same. Of course, you could split the difference and have the chords changing every 2 beats. Which again has a completely different effect of the other 2, because when it's only changing every 2 beats, you don't have that effect of the chord coming up between the beats that you're not expecting it to. And so you're ironing out one aspect of it and changing another aspect. One of the other things that we could try is to keep the chords moving every 4 beats, but rather than having a continuous quaver movement, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, to have a continuous crotchet movement, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the chords are changing at the same speed, but the surface rhythm now is actually a little bit slower. And that will completely change the energy. You can try to imagine already what that's going to sound like while I'm playing it now. That you've taken out the ba 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 ba, the driving rhythm, and just changed it to bum 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 bum. Already that's going to have a big impact on the emotion of the music. So it's already feeling calmer, possibly even a little bit sadder actually, taking that energy out of it. There's a little bit, the music somehow feels a little bit darker to me actually. And we can even take that one step further and change the harmonic rhythm stays as 1 bar for 4 beats for each chord, but change the surface rhythm to minims now, to 2 beats for each note, and that has the effect of dampening things down even further. about all of those is that the music is identical. The chords are the same, the rate at which the chords are changing is the same, but because we've changed the surface rhythm from ba 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 to ba dum, the energy has come out of the music, and the sadness level, if there is such a thing, has actually gone up as a result of that. Now, one of the other things that we can do, possibly the most obvious change to make in terms of happy or sad music, is to change the key from a major key to a minor key. The music which I've written for the sound collector is in a minor key because I feel that that's the best way of giving that kind of sinister effect. Now listen what happens if I play exactly the same music as my sound collector, but changing to G major from G minor. So I'll play the minor one first. And now the major one. It's a completely different piece. The music is identical. All that I've done is change the key signature. I'm playing the same written pitches in both versions, but with a different key signature. And you hear the music is completely different. If I sing the tune over the top of that, a stranger called this morning, it's suddenly gone perky, and it's not supposed to be perky. I'll play the minor one again. A stranger called this morning. It's a very different piece, just by changing the key. Now let's see what happens if we combine two of those ideas now, which is the slower surface rhythm that we tried earlier, but now in the major key. And listen to how this feels. Which is beautiful and relaxed and actually feels quite sunny to me. And you'll remember from earlier on I was talking about these clashes, the suspensions. I've left those in the major one for the time being, but listen to what happens if we just take those out and just keep very straightforward major chords. Now that's a progression that I'm sure many of you will know, even if you don't realise it. Lots of you will have played that. And it's actually exactly the same chord progression as my sound collector, but mine was in the minor and moving a lot faster. But it's a really nice way of illustrating how that same set of chords can lead you in a really different emotional direction, depending simply on whether you're writing your accompaniment in quavers or in minims. Now, one of the other ways that we can really be sophisticated now for very little difficulty is by, rather than doing a sweeping change from minor to major, to just change some of the chords. So in my original, the first chord was G minor. Well, let's leave that one alone. The second chord was E flat minor. Let's change that one to major, see what happens. And the third one was C minor. Let's change that to C major. And let's leave the last one alone. These are choices made fairly much at random. Leave the first one the same, change the second and third, and leave the fourth one the same. And this is the progression you end up with. Rather nice. I quite like that change to the C major chord on the third chord there, and it's actually something that I sort of half wish now, having started to think about this, that I'd actually done in my original. I rather like that progression, and as I've been doing the preparation for this, it struck me that I'd heard that progression before, and I could not work out where I'd heard it before. Anyway, it might sound more familiar if I play the accompaniment a bit more like this. To the absolutely amazing Skyfall by Adele for the James Bond movie of a few years ago, which I'm sure quite a few of you watching this will have heard already. And that in itself is a really, really interesting song in terms of harmonic rhythm that I was talking about a second ago, the speed at which the chords change. Because what we have there is the chords changing every 2 beats. So we have G minor, E flat major, C minor every 2 beats. But when you get into the chorus, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. So that when she plays the tune over the top of that, goes back to the moving every 2 beats. But you could just as easily have her accompaniment and my tune. A stranger called this morning, dressed all in black and grey. It's exactly the same chord progression. I find that really fascinating, that by taking very, very different approaches to the same chords, you've ended up with 2 dramatically different songs. Now, the last thing to say is that you could still take the same set of chords, but write a completely different melody over the top of it, a little bit like we've just seen with the Adele there. And that would, again, transform the feeling of the music, give it a very different emotional feel. So, as a for instance. Exactly the same chord progression as my sound collector, just with a different tune over the top. That tune is probably too complicated for children to sing if they've not heard the song before, so it wouldn't be appropriate for my particular song. But now listen to what happens to that music if you play exactly the same music, but by changing the key signature to play in the major instead. Very different sound, very much more happy, much more relaxed kind of feel to it. So the point about all of this is to say that we've got control over lots and lots of different things as composers. And it doesn't matter what level you're writing at. We can be thinking about the harmony, we can be thinking about the rhythm, we can be thinking about the melody, we can be thinking about dynamics, how loud or soft the music is. When I was just playing the Adele a moment before, when she goes into the chorus, suddenly everything opens out and the sound becomes absolutely massive and very dramatic as a result of that. It would sound very different if you had exactly the same music but just played quietly. We've got control over all these different things, and it's worth experimenting all the time. As I was just saying earlier on, one of the changes that I've been making while I've been looking at this is actually something that, had I made the change at the time, I would probably have included in the piece. A lot of the others that I've made, I wouldn't. I prefer what I ended up with in the first place, which isn't to say that what I did was wrong, or what I would have done would have been any better. It's probably the single best thing about being a composer, is that actually you can never, ever be wrong.